We know that Stellantis are a bunch of sons of bitches and they're greedy. But our morale is pretty high right now.
Hello everyone. Welcome to our second episode of On Strike. Today we'll be talking about the strike of the United Auto Workers Union. As you may know, auto workers in the so-called Big Three, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis are on strike. We have on-strike correspondent M. Smith on the ground at one of those three plants in Toledo, Ohio, and we will talk to M in a little bit.
Doing this type of work 7 days a week, 10 hours a day is mind-numbing. We miss our families, we miss, big events, birthdays, funerals, whatever. It's just bullshit. There's no reason why when these companies are making $12 billion profit, the CEO of Stellantis gave himself a 72% pay increase or a pay bonus on the first quarter of this year, and we're asking for 40%, which equals out to be about $12 an hour. 72% versus $12 an hour. Next time they tell us we're family, I'm going to ask them to pay my fucking electric bill next time, you know what I'm saying? Give me some child support or something.
The workers, organized by the UAW, are angry about their deteriorated living standards, while the company bosses have raked it in. In just the first half of this year, Stellantis, Ford, and GM reported profits of $11.6 billion, $3.7 billion, and $5 billion, respectively. The CEO salaries are at an eye-popping high, having gone up on average by 40% over the last 4 years since 2019. Also since 2019, the cost of living for workers has increased by over 20%, while profits for the Big Three's major shareholders have climbed 65%, and their stock buybacks have increased by a stratospheric 1,500%. UAW members are fighting for bold demands like a 46% wage increase over 4 years, regular cost of living or COLA wage increases, an end to a two-tier divide-and-conquer pay scale, and defined benefit pension plans.
No one's had a significant raise since 2012. 2009, I can go back even further. No one's had a raise.
It costs a shit ton of money to raise a kid, you know what I mean? And then also, we can't even buy the cars. They're so expensive, they're overpriced for us, and we're the ones that are building them. We don't get paid enough to even buy them.
If you don't pay us what we're worth, then we can't really take anything else seriously, in my mind.
The union is demanding guarantees that workers hired at the automaker's new electric vehicle battery plants be covered by union contracts. A recent Gallup poll shows 75% of Americans support the strike. This type of working-class white solidarity can have a real impact. In 2019, when the mass appeal of Bernie Sanders' campaign for Medicare for All was at a high, it became a factor in auto union negotiations. At the time, GM, which initially withdrew employees' medical benefits within days of the strike's beginning, experienced a massive backlash and were forced not only to reinstate them in the middle of the strike, but to agree to freeze medical costs for the life of the contract. This was a major win for auto workers and an indication of the pressure that wider anger in society can bring on to labor struggles. The history of the UAW is littered with many previous iterations of leadership with a rotten business unionist approach, which made the union look more like an extension of corporate HR departments than a union that fights for its members.
Past administrations would have negotiated our contract behind closed doors and brought it to us, and we wouldn't have not even known what was being negotiated.
This unfortunately reflects the approach of many other labor leaders in recent decades. Recent elections of reform leadership in unions like the UAW of Shawn Fain and the Teamsters of Sean O'Brien is important and shows the increasing pressure from rank-and-file workers and a real desire for change from the business as usual of business unionism. Business unionism, as some may already know, is the idea that workers should quietly let labor leaders negotiate mutually agreeable contracts with the bosses. In reality, they are often filled with defeats for workers rather than actively organizing themselves. One of the hallmarks of business unionism is preventing strikes at all costs in exchange for a seat at the table to negotiate. Business unionists put their stress on the bargaining process. They fear antagonizing management by any real mobilization of workers, much less going on strike. The emergence of leaders like Fain, the new UAW president, is a shift away from the leaders who preceded him at UAW, who were responsible, among other things, for the stunning betrayal of their members in 2007 when they accepted a dramatic expansion of the rotten two-tier wage program on the race to the bottom rationale promoted by the capitalist class that workers who have won gains need to give them up, or else the jobs will move to states or countries where they can get workers for cheaper. And it's been decades, frankly, since we have had prominent union leaders speak publicly like Fain has, including pushing back against the false accusation that workers who fight for their rights are fomenting quote-unquote class warfare. This is what Fain said.
People accuse us and say this is class warfare. There's been class warfare going on in this country for the last 40 years. The billionaire class has been taking everything and leaving everybody else to fight for the scraps.
It is refreshing to hear a labor leader speaking like this openly about class struggle and the need for workers to fight back. But we cannot afford to stop at rhetoric. What are the strategies that actually constitute a break from business unionism and go in the direction of what is needed, an approach based on class struggle? Unfortunately, last year we saw the leaders of the railroad workers' unions fail to mount any response to Biden and the Democrats and Republicans breaking their strike. Keep in mind, the majority of the railroad workers are Teamsters. This summer, we saw the Teamster leadership hold back a strike at UPS, where the workers have tremendous social power and could have won a victory that could have been course-changing for the US labor movement. So it's really important that the UAW strike is going forward, and it does have the potential to have a galvanizing effect on the labor movement. But unfortunately, rather than call for an industry-wide strike of all the UAW members, Fain and the union's leadership have decided to do what they call a stand-up strike, which, as it turns out, is really a strike just at 3 plants. So currently, less than 10% of the union's membership is actually on strike. It's very important that the strike is at locations of all 3 of the big auto corporations, and it's understandable that many UAW rank and file think this is a good start. We have also heard labor activists say that this limited strike is a smart strategy, that this is a chaos strategy to keep the bosses guessing. Some of the people who say this also say one day longer, one day stronger. For more on all this, we are now being joined by M. Smith. Hi, M. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, great to be here.
So you are at a UAW strike location in Ohio. Can you tell us more about where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm here in Toledo, Ohio. You can see it's the Jeep plant here. This location in northern Ohio, just outside of Detroit, about an hour south. They make all of the Jeep Wranglers and the Jeep Gladiators that Stellantis produces. Stellantis is the larger company that owns Jeep. Almost all of the assembly of these vehicles comes from this plant. So if you drive a Jeep Wrangler, if you drive a Jeep Gladiator, it comes from right here in Toledo, Ohio.
Right. And these workers are doing the work that the bosses are making so much money from. So can you tell me, from talking to the workers there at the picket line, what's the morale like and how do they feel about the way their bosses are shortchanging them? I mean, themselves making so much money and yet denying the workers their basic living standards.
Workers are angry. You know, they're excited to be out here fighting. They have some really bold demands, fighting for a 40% raise, fighting for an end to the really hated 2-tier system. They're fighting against these companies trying to move their jobs down to non-union plants in the South, in other countries, as has been happening over the course of decades. They're energized. They're ready to fight, and they're ready to continue the strike.
And have you heard anything about which of these demands are extremely crucial to them? Obviously, all those demands are extremely important. But what are you hearing about what's paramount in their minds? And also, tell me something more about how the workers feel about this race to the bottom strategy that the bosses are trying to get them to accept. You know, basically having this perennial threat that if they don't accept worsening of their conditions at work and their living standards, then their jobs will be sent to some other state or some other country.
Right, absolutely. The demands that come up the most on the picket line that workers really care about or fighting around are wages. We've seen wages for auto workers since 2003, real wages when you account for inflation, have gone down 30% in the last 20 years. So workers are fighting for a real raise. Workers are fighting for cost of living adjustments. We saw record inflation last year. This is something that comes up all the time on the picket lines, the way that costs have gone up of rent, of food, of different things, of everything. And then finally, the end of this two-tier system. We have, going back to 2008, the Great Recession, the bailout of the auto industry by the Obama administration, the accepting of a lot of concessions in contracts that previous union leadership negotiated, ended up with a two-tier system at GM, at Ford, at Stellantis, where workers who are coming in don't have the pension the previous workers have, don't have the health care the previous workers got, often don't have the wages that previous workers had, or have to work longer to get to those top wages. And so workers are fighting for an elimination of those tiers so that workers on the plant are equal.
I'm more so fighting for everyone, more so for the supplementals to be able to get rolled over as full-timers, and also me coming in as a tier. I would like for that to be eliminated. It took me 8 years just to get the top wage.
They haven't offered shit, honestly. They want the tiers to stay. They like I don't got to answer to no one. Get that guy in here, give him $15 an hour, he'll build my stuff, But these people have been here, we've been here for years.
You hear it all the time, people saying, I don't want to work next to someone, next to my brother or sister in the union who's making less than me, that doesn't have health care, that doesn't have pensions. We're fighting for equality among all UAW members and make sure we end that two-tier system.
That's really amazing and heartening to hear about that kind of solidarity. It's certainly not surprising to us. Of course, you and I have been rank and file union members ourselves. The understanding that an injury to one is an injury to all, and the hatred of the two-tier system, the justifiable hatred of that, and standing up for their fellow workers who are making less than them for the exact same job. So precisely along those lines, tell me what the workers feel about what's come to be known as the stand-up strike strategy, where we obviously want solidarity among the workers, but the strike itself so far has been only at 3 plants and incorporates less than 10% of the membership. So what do they think about that, and what have you heard from them about the need to escalate?
Yeah, so workers here are among the workers at one of 3 plants around the country, the others in Wayne, Michigan, Wentzville, Missouri, and then of course here in Toledo, who are on strike. In the lead up to the strike deadline on September 14th, the contract of the UAW members expired at midnight on the 14th, and many members were expecting in the lead up to that contract expiring that all 150,000 workers would be on strike. Shawn Fain, the president of the union, for weeks and weeks leading up to this, was saying that September 14th is not a reference point, it's a deadline. So workers took that as understanding that if that deadline passes, every single worker, all 150,000 auto workers would be on strike. That's not what happened. The day before that deadline happened, the president of the union, Fain, got on a live stream and announced this thing that they're calling the stand-up strike, in which only a portion of the union membership is on strike. Only 3 plants, only 13,000 workers out of that 150,000. And some of the workers here have said that they had some disappointment around that initially, and thought that workers should have gone out all together, all at once.
If every plant went on strike at once, what are they going to do? They're going to lose billions instead of millions.
There is some optimism, I think, that this strike is going to escalate, that this is just the start. People have a lot of faith, a lot of confidence in the UAW leadership. It was elected to oust an old, corrupt leadership that had a long history of negotiating sellout contracts. And so I think members here still have some confidence that this strike is going to escalate from here. Many people that I've talked to see the need to escalate. They say that we need to go beyond these 3 plants. What Stellantis is offering, what these other companies are offering, is still not sufficient. We need to add more pressure, and we need to expand the strike.
The more stand-ups we have, yes, that will definitely get the eyes and attention of the CEO, COO.
Right. That's really important that you pointed out, Em, and I was just talking about this earlier about how this new leadership under Shawn Fain is very much in stark contrast to the really sellout and downright corrupt leadership of UAW that preceded in many of the decades in recent decades. Is there talk among the rank and file about the need to now urgently go for an all-out strike?
Workers are definitely concerned about the state of negotiations of the kind of things that Stellantis, these are Stellantis employees, company that owns Jeep here, they're very concerned about the negotiations where Stellantis just put out this supposed counter proposal that they leaked through the media, talking about how they've improved their offer and they're offering something new. When you look at the details of this contract, it's almost exactly the same as what they were offering before the strike happened.
They're playing games. Change the words around. They're playing games.
So workers see it as totally unacceptable. They're offering 21% over 4 years, which doesn't even keep up with inflation that's happened, much less the 30% in wages that workers have lost over the last 20 years. So workers, definitely see the need to build this fight, to escalate. Many workers are talking about the need for all 150,000 workers to go out at some point. And, many workers here are talking about needing to put more of a squeeze on these employers.
Right. We do need more of that squeeze. And in fact, we haven't mentioned how Ford has already announced 600 layoffs and GM is planning, I think, 2,000 layoffs. Are workers worried about the layoffs at all? And let me also, add another sort of question to that. You wrote an article about this strike a few days ago, and you said, quote, "If anyone hoped that the stand-up strike was an exciting militant strategy to stop UAW's profits, like the historic sit-down strikes of auto workers in the 1930s, they will unfortunately be disappointed." End quote. Can you explain what you mean by that? And do you think the stand-up strike is the same or similar to the sit-down strikes of the past? And also, what do you think about this one day longer, one day stronger idea?
Yeah, I think this has been something that's been a conversation among workers. Shawn Fain has been talking about the sit-down strikes of the 1930s, the militant history of the UAW, which actually goes back to here in Toledo in 1934, the auto light strike, where auto workers here, it was really the birth of the UAW. At that point, it wasn't called the UAW. But they went on strike here, had a historic strike, one of 3 across the country, that shut down the industry locally, that expanded to other sections of the working class, and won huge victories that sparked the labor movement of the 1930s. And then in the later 1930s, in 1936 and 1937, you had this series of sit-down strikes in Flint, Michigan, in particular, where workers sat down on the job, refused to work, said, "We're not going to work. We're going to shut down production entirely until the bosses give in, recognize our union, negotiate a contract, give us the wage increases and the benefits that we need." And that really was the foundation. That militant organizing was the foundation of the UAW, which became a real powerhouse of the U.S. labor movement. This strike is very different. Shawn Fain and the leadership are calling this the answer to the sit-down strikes, really comparing this to those militant actions. In reality, this strike is not shutting down production on a mass scale. It's not shutting down the profits of these big 3 companies. Many other plants around the country that are not being shut down that could provide workers much more power and much more leverage the way that those sit-down strikes did in the 1930s and put massive pressure on these employers. Unfortunately, that's not currently what's happening.
Right. And I heard that you had a chance to talk to Congressmember Ro Khanna. Just for our viewers, Ro Khanna is a rising star in the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He, like unfortunately virtually all the progressives, actually I should say, voted to break the railroad workers' strike, including the chair of the Progressive Caucus, Pramila Jayapal. So what did Ro Khanna have to say?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty bold for someone who voted to break a railroad strike to come out here to a picket line. A picket line that would have been much stronger if rail workers had gone out on strike, if they had won a much stronger contract, if they had won these demands for 14 paid sick days or even more, fighting for the safety that they needed to prevent disasters like in East Palestine, which happened here in the state of Ohio, where Toledo workers are on strike right now. I think it is pretty rich for him to come out here to this picket line after taking such an anti-union position. Of course, politicians are coming out of the woodwork to present as if they support auto workers. The question, though, that workers here are asking, and I just spoke to one of the picket captains here, who was saying that, it's great that politicians are coming out. It's great that they're, saying these kind of vague statements. But what we really need is for them to stand firmly with us. Otherwise, none of it really matters.
Biden has not even come close to doing enough. If he really backs us, he needs to stop putting out these blank statements of just saying he backs us. He needs to in verbatim repeat what we need. He needs to say word for word. If we're asking for a 40% raise, he needs to come out and say give them a 40% raise. Because you come out and just say we're going to get record profits, giving us a 50-cent raise is a record profit because we're not making that now.
But if you're not talking about the demand for a 40% raise, if you're not talking about the need to end the two-tier system, if you are not putting pressure on Joe Biden, putting pressure on Congress to bring pressure to bear and not take actions like the breaking of the railroad strike, then really you're not doing anything. We need politicians, we need representatives, we need unions that are going to fight, that are going to win, that are ultimately going to be the vehicles that win these strong contracts the workers need.
Yeah, exactly. It's really easy to get photo ops alongside striking workers who are making all the sacrifices while these politicians, for the most part, stand up for the interests of the billionaire class. And in fact, I know obviously the progressives, so-called progressives like Ro Khanna are there, but also Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, has been at the Detroit picket line and at the Michigan Assembly Plant picket line. And I also saw some news coverage where Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, who's a corporate politician, if there ever was one, also at the picket line. Again, all of these politicians spewing out empty words while at the same time protecting the profits of the bosses. And as you said, the Biden administration is now directly involved in this. Biden has sent two of his prominent representatives to Michigan, I believe. What do the workers think about the Biden White House getting involved in any way?
Yeah, I asked a couple of workers about this, and UAW members know about the betrayal of the rail workers' strike, of the Democrats and Joe Biden stopping that strike. And frankly, I think they don't trust him. I think that many workers are suspicious that he's not actually fighting for auto workers at that table, which every single point of history of his administration, of his last decades in Congress, points towards that.
I am not confident that he will, but I'm not afraid that he's going to either, because we all have each other. We're all going to be out here whether he supports us or not. It'd be great for him to be on our side, but if not, we don't need him. And this is true also of Ro Khanna, of all of these Democrats that have not fought, have not done what's necessary to win things like a $15 minimum wage, to build the union movement, to fight for universal health care, to fight for even $2,000 checks, which was one of the original demands that got Democrats elected in 2020 that working people desperately needed. And on every single one of those issues, Democrats clawed things back. They didn't fight. They didn't deliver. And workers now are saying, we don't need you. We are going to build this on our own power, and we're going to do what it takes to win.
Right. And I think all of what you were saying also highlights the need for the labor movement to break with the Democratic Party and fight for its own independent political representation, a new working class party. I hope Cornel West is able to visit some of these picket lines. And I should also clarify, having been an elected representative myself, and fighting for the working class, and you've been part of that as well. We have to clarify that we don't agree with some of the talking points from some labor leaders, from some of the political pundits that outside agitators, meaning anybody who's not in a specific union that is fighting for a certain thing or contract or whatever, is allowed to talk about it, allowed to have an opinion about it, allowed to have any influence on it. We don't accept that. And we actually recognize that this false allegation of you're an outsider actually is used against fighters on the left who want to build strong working class struggle to win victories that will not only help the workers who are immediately in question, but will help build the wider struggle as a whole. And in fact, we've had a lot of experience of that in Seattle as well, where some of the labor leaders, unfortunately, and Democrats certainly have attempted to push back against us, saying you should not get involved because you are outsiders. But before I let you go, Em, can I quickly ask you one question, which in many ways is not talked about, but also is a very important piece of all of this, and that's the question of electric vehicles. I think electric vehicles are one of the ways, moving towards EV is one of the ways in which the auto bosses are using to dismantle try and dismantle the auto union. What are your thoughts about that? Are workers conscious of that?
Yeah, so speaking of the Biden administration and his claims that he's the most pro-union president in history, this is one of the key reasons why UAW has not endorsed Joe Biden, is this question of electric vehicles. The Biden administration gave $15 billion to the auto industry, to the big three, basically a blank check, to build these electric vehicles largely in non-union plants in the South. This is an attempt to divide workers. This is an attempt to expand the non-union production at the historically unionized Big Three, and it's an attempt to break the union. It's an attempt to remove union workers entirely from the auto production process on the basis of this electric vehicle production, on the basis of kind of draping themselves, the Biden administration, in this kind of green environmental garb, but in fact using this to screw workers. And workers absolutely see this very clearly. And workers are fighting against it. This is a key part of the contract fight. Workers are seeing this contract as an important opportunity to rebuild the auto industry, the unionized auto industry, not just at those electric vehicle plants at Stellantis and Ford and GM that are going to non-union workers in the South and non-union workplaces, but also to unionize Tesla, to unionize some of the foreign auto manufacturers, Honda and Toyota, who now have huge operations of auto assembly and other operations in the United States. And so this question of electric vehicles is really key and really points to the important stakes. The UAW had 600,000 unionized auto workers. Today it's 150,000. There are still over a million auto workers who work in the United States in manufacturing, and workers see this contract as a way to build that organization, build that union density, and ultimately raise the standards of workers across the industry.
Right. Those numbers you laid out about what proportion of the auto workers in the industry are unionized and the huge proportion that are not really puts that in sobering perspective about how much is at stake. And in fact, the union leadership is correct to have brought this up as a prominent demand of demanding that all the high capacity battery plants for EV should be unionized. But that's precisely why we need a powerful, sharp strike in order to win these, because it's not going to be on the basis of how morally just that is, but it's on the basis of the forces of class struggle. And as you correctly said, it also points the way towards the other looming questions about unionizing Tesla, Honda, Toyota, these massive plants. And something that we did not have time to touch on, but I just wanted to mention, is also this false dichotomy that is presented by the Democrats and Republicans and some labor leaders, that maybe you can have green energy or you can have decent jobs, but you can't have both. But what we're really seeing is that on the basis of capitalism, we're going to have neither. As the working class, we should reject this false dichotomy and build a powerful fight back to address the climate crisis and to win decent living standards for workers. But we'll continue this conversation as we go forward. I'm really glad to have you here. We'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds good. Solidarity.
Solidarity. A lot of working people and activists on the left and in the labor movement have understandably been wondering about and debating the merits of the stand-up strike as Shawn Fain has put forward. Many are saying that the stand-up strike with only 3 locations going on strike first is a smart strategy with an element of surprise, that it is this element of surprise that hits the bosses, and that Fain always intended to escalate in steps. Significantly, in his latest video address to the UAW membership on Monday evening, Fain announced that they would expand the strike to additional locations Friday morning, but qualified this by saying the UAW would only expand the strike if they had not made quote-unquote serious progress at the bargaining table. The plan to escalate is certainly a welcome one, and we will have to see how this develops. This is the strategy that Fain and the UAW leadership have chosen. And while I am not inclined to agree that it's better than an all-out strike, we do need to see how it is carried out. How rapidly will the strike be escalated? Which plants will be chosen to go on strike next, and how many? Will the strike damage the company's profits deeply in the way needed to win the workers' demands? Because it's only a strong strike that shuts down production and the profit machine of the bosses that forces them to make real concessions. The history of the 1930s sit-down strikes of the Auto Workers Union, which Shawn Fain has repeatedly alluded to, shows precisely this. By occupying the factories, the workers prevented any scab production, brought production to a grinding halt, and won historic concessions. The strikes of the 1930s also shut down the supply chain, bringing not just the plants being struck to a halt, but also much of the auto industry. That is not what is happening here. It is extremely exciting that UAW has gone on strike, but unfortunately, these three plants do not appear to be strategic targets that are having an outsized impact. As the Associated Press reported, Merrick Masters, a business professor at Wayne State University in Detroit, said, quote, "The union didn't go after the company's big cash cows, which are full-size pickup trucks and big SUVs, and went more for plants that make vehicles with lower profit margins." End quote. So it appears that these are not strategic locations at all. And Masters goes on to speculate about the logic of the union leadership, saying, quote, "They want to give the companies some space without putting them up against the wall. They are not putting them right into the corner. You put an animal in the corner and it's dangerous," end quote. But this is absolutely not how you win a strike, by letting the company off easy. This was not the strategy of the 1930s auto workers who backed the auto industry bosses against the wall in every way. That is how they won. In fact, it is dangerous for the workers and the union movement to give the bosses the room to maneuver and undermine the strike by allowing production and delivery to continue during the strike. Why didn't the UAW leadership decide to strike key locations like the ones that make the popular and profitable products that this Detroit-based professor is referring to? The Kentucky truck plant, which is Ford's biggest plant in the U.S. with over 8,600 hourly employees, making the Super Duty F-250 and other heavy-duty pickups and SUVs. Or Kansas City, with 6,900 hourly employees, making the Ford F-150, which is the world's biggest selling pickup, as well as Ford's ubiquitous transit, cargo, and delivery vans. The Teamsters have already stated they will not cross UAW picket lines, so none of the trucks already produced would be delivered. Ford's own website says, Ford's Transit and E-Transit together remain the top commercial van in both North America and Europe. 9 of the vehicles it sells, including Transit, E-Transit, and Super Duty pickups, more than from any other automaker, recently earned Vincentric Best Fleet Value in America awards. Cutting off the supply of these would impact mainly commercial buyers, putting maximum pressure on the companies. Another area that has been discussed by activists within the union's Reform Caucus UAWD is to hit the parts distribution centers, which are also unionized and whose closure would have an immediate impact on dealerships throughout the country. All of this is important to force the hand of the companies. Stellantis, for example, are currently boasting that they have 85 days supply inventory for Jeep and 100 days for Ram. The enormous public support for the strike, running at 75%, as I said before, could be utilized by picketing dealerships, as the UAW threatened to do towards the end of the 2019 GM strike. These highly public locations would make perfect targets for mass picketing by other unions and community supporters if the UAW put out the call. Much has been made about the element of surprise. In drawing an analogy between the sit-down strikes and today's stand-up strike, Fain has mainly focused on the element of surprise as the key component that led to victory nearly 100 years ago. He has talked often about how keeping the bosses guessing by not revealing which plants are about to go on strike is at the heart of forcing the boss's hand. It is true that at the time, the novelty of the sit-down strikes caught the auto companies by surprise. It is also true that the unions used some smart tactics to keep the bosses guessing. But in my view, it is not correct to overemphasize or elevate the importance of such smaller tactical aspects of the sit-down strikes, in which the paramount feature of the strategy was the fact that the workers powerfully shut down production throughout most of the industry. Another question. The strike started last Friday. The first escalation of the strike is due to be announced this coming Friday. Why wait till the 8th day of the strike before even the first escalation? A third question that needs to be raised is why use a strategy which has, by all accounts, created confusion among the rank and file and caused dents in their solidarity by some going on strike and others either making their full salary or risking layoffs for working without a contract? It is also not clear what Fain would consider quote-unquote serious progress in negotiations by Friday. How would serious progress be defined? While we are obviously not part of the UAW strategy discussions, this approach seems to reflect an underlying struggle in the UAW leadership between wanting to carry out a strike but wanting to stop short of shutting down production in order to not anger the bosses or the Biden administration. I strongly urge the union leadership to urgently escalate the strike to the rest of the plants. I'll just close by saying I still don't see how this stand-up strike is somehow a better idea than an all-out, short, sharp strike with mass picketing to stop deliveries of both new vehicles and parts, which would bring the full power of the auto workers and working-class solidarity to bear against the bosses. The fundamental question that decides if a strike can win, let alone win big, is one of class forces. That is, what actually hits the bosses where it hurts, in their profits and bottom line. Minimizing pain to the bosses in the name of being strategic is not in fact being strategic. But as I said, we will see how the strike progresses, and all of our solidarity goes out to Shawn Fain and the UAW membership. Before we end today, On Strike wanted to send our solidarity to the rank and file members of SAG-AFTRA, the Screen Actors Guild, American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, a union of film and television performers, and the WGA, the Writers Guild of America, who have been on strike for a while now. We will be covering that strike very soon. On Strike is a production of Workers Strike Back, a nationwide organization fighting on working class demands like a $25 an hour minimum wage, union jobs, Medicare for all, and against discrimination and oppression. Workers Strike Back is also calling for a new party for working people because neither the Republican Party nor the Democratic Party represents us. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Find out more at workerstrikeback.org and donate. On Strike is a broadcast entirely for working people and funded entirely by working people. See you this Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific, when we'll be talking to Green Party presidential candidate Cornel West. Thank you and solidarity.